So I'm here with David Willetts, the former Minister for Universities and Science and now Professor at King's College London. David, you've had the brief as Minister and Shadow Minister for 6 years. What more do you think businesses and universities could do together to create more innovation in the UK?
Well, first of all, thank you for recognising that sort of amazing, fascinating time I had in those 6 years. I think you've got to start with quite an unusual feature of the English system, which is how much of our publicly funded research happens on university campuses. We have a higher proportion of our publicly funded R&D on universities than most other countries. I think we've made great progress, especially since the work of Richard Lambert, for example. But precisely because so much of the R&D happens on university sites and relatively little in freestanding institutes, I think there are still medium-sized and small companies that just don't know where to find and how to access the R&D capabilities that are available. And that's where NCUB comes in, and where I think we still need to do more to raise the profile and to make it easier for a harassed small businessman, especially running an SME, to find the support he needs.
And do you think that when you launched the NCUB, you said that there should be one single phone call? Do you think that there's a more digital solution to it rather than phone calls?
That's exactly the point I'd expect you to make, David. Yeah, and where it needn't literally be a phone call, you're absolutely right. It can be online access to information. And of course, we are creating separately the research portal that will, for the first time, bring together information on all the different publicly funded research projects going on across the UK. And that is a natural base for an online portal that NCUB, I know, is setting up to provide the information that a small business in particular should be able to access.
Do you think, I mean, after the 6 years you've been doing this, do you think government's too focused on spin-outs and startups rather than trying to grow companies that are already moderately successful that could be more successful through university collaboration?
I think you're right. And although, in general, I thought Richard Lambert's work was excellent, and the last thing I wanted to do, or Vince Cable in 2010, is kind of tear a thing up and start again. I do think that some of the Richard Lambert work led people to count spin-outs as a kind of the measure of performance, when it's a very misleading measure. Indeed, I think one of the problems is sometimes spin-outs are created too soon, when they're too vulnerable, when they need to stay in a more supportive environment, don't even need to become a corporate entity, because it's still really a lab-based project. Yeah. So yes, I think there are many other forms of university business collaboration than simply universities doing spin-outs.
And do you think there's kind of an MIT model in ministers' mind too often, that the MIT is the only way to do it?
There is a kind of flow of people going over to the US and announcing they've seen the future in Stanford or MIT or somewhere. We've got to do it here. And of course, we've got a very diverse sector, which is a good thing. Yes. I mean, I do believe that we need to provide more support on the journey to commercialisation, closer to commercialisation. And one of my arguments with colleagues was always, if you look at the US, actually there, the public support for startups and new ideas and enterprises goes much closer to market than it did in the UK. We stopped too soon. And that's where, for example, our new catapult centres based on German Fraunhofers comes in. That's why more patient funding for longer is important. That's why Innovate UK matters so much.
And to switch on to employability, one of the things I know you've always been passionate about is increasing the employability of undergraduates and master's students. Where does that passion come from?
Well, it was partly, if you just, as a believer in data and information, what was clear to me was that for the kind of families and kids I saw, they were getting often very sophisticated advice at their schools about the course to choose, the university to choose, what the outcomes might be. And then in the constituency, I saw teenagers for whom going to university, if you contemplated at all, just meant going to your local university. There was an assumption that universities were all the same. And they just weren't getting the information and advice that if you're really interested in this, you should be thinking of such and such university, or there's the case for moving away from home for 2 or 3 years. And so I think especially for kids who don't have the social networks that provide them with that information, there wasn't any good substitute. And getting out the information on employment outcomes from university courses is very important, but there's still a hell of a lot to do. These data of where you are after 6 months, it's just not good enough. It's not as significant information. I want better, longer term information.
Well, at the NCUB, we talk about employability being the fourth job and not the first job, which seems to me a better lens to look at this challenge in.
That's a great way of putting it.
You commissioned the Wilson Review from which the NCUB came. What was in your mind when you commissioned it?
Well, it was again this issue that Rolls-Royce knows its way around the British university scene, and if Rolls-Royce or BP need research, they know where to go to and how to assess it. But there were a lot of SMEs that we could see in biz were just not research intensive, that needed access. They may not have their capacity to fund their own R&D department, but they certainly should be able to access the resources of universities across the country, but especially universities in their neighbourhood. And Tim Wilson, because he'd done such excellent work at Hertfordshire in really being path-breaking in links between universities and business, we thought he'd be a great guy to look at the subject. And he came up with some really important proposals, including the creation of NCUB.
It's number one proposal. And as you travel for your job, what other systems around the world do you think we should aspire to? Or do you think actually we're so different that we should just be, as David Sainsbury says, be true to your roots, work out a version of university business collaboration that's true to the UK?
Yeah, I think we are distinctive, and we shouldn't be embarrassed about being distinctive. I have to say, and this is maybe a peculiar idea when one's talking to NCUB, but I do think that what we lack compared with Germany or US is a network of research institutes independent of universities that are well recognised. Our publicly funded research council research institutes are really quite limited in number. We're now creating the catapult centres. And I would like a complementary network of research institutes like that. Whereas at the moment, it's almost that the only safe haven for a research institute is to come under the embrace of a university and be on a university campus.
In conclusion, David, you've done this for 6 years. What role do you think government should play in fostering business-university collaboration?
There's a lot of different roles that government should play, but we should start from the point of view, of course, that we respect the autonomy of universities, and businesses are grown-up entities. So it's not a matter of giving instructions, but there are a lot of things we can do. I still think we can do a hell of a sight more on the data on employment outcomes. I think we can do a lot more to make available information about the research that we are publicly funding. I think also we can do more to help break down the barriers between especially SMEs and universities. I was always a great fan of innovation vouchers. They were, I thought, one of the most useful things that some of the RDAs did. They carry on with some support from Innovate UK. I would like personally to see innovation vouchers extended and doing more. So there's a host of specifics that we can do, and also above all use our convening power to try to break down barriers and make sure there's a proper debate about the policy options we should be pursuing.
Excellent. David Willetts, thank you.
Thanks, David.